Hi, everyone, this is the Encyclopedia channel, and this program will share with you a best-selling book called The Courage to be Hated. This is a book by a philosopher reading another psychologist. The philosopher is the author of this book, Ichiro Kishimi. He was a very influential philosopher in Japan. When Ichiro Kishimi was 30 years old, he encountered the theory of another psychologist, Adlerian psychology. Since then, he has devoted himself to the study of Adlerian thought. This courage to be disliked introduces the results of Ichiro Kishimi's research on Adlerian psychology. After watching this video, we will also understand the reasons for our unhappiness mentioned in the book, and how to have the courage to be hated to obtain high-level happiness. Adler's full name is Alfred Adler, an Austrian psychologist. He was the same generation as the psychologist Freud, and he was also a follower of Freud's thought. But later, he was also the first person to oppose Freud's theoretical system, and the two parted ways because of their opposing views. Simply put, Freud believed that your current situation comes from past experiences, your environment, and other people around you. But Adler disagrees with this. He believes that your current situation is only related to yourself. Adler started out on his own and created individual psychology. After reading this book, I have a strong feeling that it is appropriate to reread Adler's ideas in our day and age. Because in this era, whether it is technology or ideas, the update and iteration speed is too fast. To a large extent, you need to have the ability to continue to develop in your field. For example, we often see that many young and promising people have made great achievements when they were young and enjoyed extremely high honors. But this achievement is difficult to sustain. This is because once they are no longer surrounded by flowers and applause, they often cannot accept it. They have not developed a complete internal self-esteem system. And Adler's thinking will tell you that your success and happiness have nothing to do with anyone else, and everything depends on yourself. Adler's ideas will help you build this internal self-esteem system. At first glance, you may think that this sounds like an inspirational story. But it's really not. But any inspirational story sounds reasonable when it sounds, but when you think about it carefully, there is actually no logic, let alone use. Adler's thought is not an inspirational story, because it is deduced based on a set of strict logic. The deduced conclusion not only makes sense after you hear it, but also withstands careful scrutiny and debate with other people. Not only that, in this book, Kishimi Ichiro also adopted the form of philosophical classics such as the Analects of Confucius and Utopia dialogue. The entire book is a dialogue between a young man and a philosopher. The youth asks questions, and the philosopher answers questions. The reason why Ichiro Kishimi expresses Adler's thoughts in this form is because it is easy to understand, and more importantly, he wants to tell us that Adler's thoughts do not only belong to the category of clinical psychology. He is a thinker and philosopher. This book discusses more philosophical issues. Next, we will share this book with you in two parts. Part 1, what are the reasons for our unhappiness? The second part talks about how to have the so-called courage to be hated. In Adler's view, how to find that state of freedom and happiness. First part. In Adler's view, whose fault is our misfortune? Where do our troubles come from? Before answering this question, we need to talk about one of Adler's core ideas, that is, you can make your own choices. Specifically, your life is not given by others, but chosen by yourself. Your choices have nothing to do with anyone else or what happened in the past. This is the most fundamental difference between Adler and Freud. To give an example, in this book, the author mentioned a female student whose distress was that she was afraid of seeing people and blushed when she was in front of people. She said that she wanted to cure this blush phobia no matter what. The philosopher asked her, if this blush phobia is cured, what do you want to do? The girl replied that there was a boy she liked very much and wanted to date, but because of this blushing problem, she never dared. Express your heart. The girl also said that once the blush phobia is cured, she will confess to him immediately. Hearing this, I guess your first reaction may be, how could this girl have such misfortune? Who caused it? Maybe it was because of the humiliation from their parents, which made them afraid when they saw strangers, or because they were seriously hurt in love. If you think so, Freud would very much agree with you. It seems plausible to explain present unhappiness in terms of past experiences, especially childhood trauma. Adler, however, didn't think so. Adler said that if we blindly rely on past reasons to explain things, we will fall into an absolute judgment. Our present and even the future are all determined by past experiences and cannot be changed at all. This view is called causalism. Contrary to causality, what Adler advocates is a teleology. Teleology would say that the reason why a girl suffers from blushing syndrome and is always incurable is not because no suitable treatment has been found, but because her misfortune is her own choice. How do you say this? In Adler's view, the thing that girls are most afraid of and want to avoid the most is being rejected by the person they like, which is the blow and self-denial that may be brought about by falling out of love. But as long as there is blushing syndrome, she will think the reason why I can't date him is because of this blushing syndrome. In this way, you don't have to muster up the courage to confess, and you can convince yourself even if you are rejected. More importantly, she can live in fantasy with the idea of if the blush phobia is cured, I can also have love. Of course, this blushing phobia is not something she imagined, it is real, but it is still the girl's own choice. Through the example just now, let's briefly review Adler's core idea. Adler said that the reason why you are unfortunate now is precisely because you have chosen unfortunate yourself. The reason why you can't change is because you have made the determination to not change. Let me talk about another phenomenon that we are all familiar with, inferiority complex. It describes the negative emotional experience that results from underestimating yourself when compared with others. The first person to explain inferiority complex in this way was Adler. Adler used German, and the word in German also means inferiority, a word about self-worth judgments, that is, feeling worthless, feeling insignificant. In Adler's view, in fact, everyone has an inferiority complex. However, low self-esteem is not a bad thing. Why? Adler said that we human beings live in this world as a powerless existence. Everyone wishes to be free from this state of impotence, so everyone seeks superiority, everyone yearns for progress. Toddlers learn to stand in the pursuit of superiority, they learn language and communicate with other people in pursuit of superiority, and the continuous progress of science throughout human history is also the result of the pursuit of superiority. It can be said that inferiority complex is a source of motivation for people to constantly pursue excellence. Inferiority complex makes people feel their own inadequacy all the time, so as to make continuous efforts to improve. But you can definitely imagine that we also meet many people in our lives who become particularly negative because of low self-esteem. If they don't do anything, they decide they can't do it, and it's harder than anything to get them to change. What's going on here? Adler said that this kind of situation should not be called inferiority complex, but inferiority complex. Inferiority complex means that some people use inferiority complex as some kind of excuse. It's like thinking I can't find a partner because I'm not pretty, or I can't succeed because I don't have a good education. This kind of conclusion that because you have A, you can't do B is beyond the scope of inferiority complex and is an inferiority complex. Moreover, Adler emphasized that this inferiority complex is still your own choice. Hearing this, you may ask, why do some people choose an inferiority complex to be their own umbrella? If there is one sentence to answer, it is that they all avoid being hurt in their relationships with others. In Adler's view, interpersonal relationship is the source of all troubles and bad emotions. Why? Just imagine what most people do when they want to achieve the goal of not getting hurt in a relationship. It's also very simple, you just need to become a person who only looks at your own shortcomings and tries not to get involved in interpersonal relationships. In this way, as long as you hide in your own shell, you can have as little relationship with others as possible, and if you are rejected or hurt by others, you can use this reason to comfort yourself, because I have such shortcomings. Will be rejected, as long as I don't have this shortcoming, I will be very likable. It can be said that as long as one chooses to use one's misfortune as a weapon, one will always need this misfortune. In addition to the inferiority complex, there is also a common psychology called superiority complex for the troubles caused by interpersonal relationships. It is to compare with others everywhere and fully show off one's own superiority. This kind of person actually wants to use the misfortune of others to show that he is special. They always want to dominate others in everything. Do you think such a person is happy? Of course not. As long as he feels that someone has surpassed him, he will feel anxious and restless, and will even do anything to regain his sense of superiority. You see, anyone who is part of this complex social network will feel troubled. So Adler said, people's troubles come from interpersonal relationships. If you want to eliminate troubles, I am afraid that only one person can survive in the universe. The above is the content of the first part. Adler believes that all troubles come from interpersonal relationships. It is not our past experiences that determine our present condition, but the meaning we attach to them. Everything about you is your own choice. From this perspective, Adler's psychology is also a psychology about courage. If you are a person who is trying to overcome challenges, if you are a person who is not satisfied with the status quo and is struggling to climb another peak in life, you need the courage to actively give meaning to the past experience. You need the courage to actively choose to change. You also need the courage to be hated in all kinds of relationships. The second part. Next, let's talk about how to obtain this courage to be hated and how to find a state of freedom and happiness. Starting from the point of view that all troubles come from interpersonal relationships, Adler believes that each of us is faced with three major life issues, namely, work issues, friendship issues, and love issues. At first glance, you might say that these three major topics are inseparable from our complex social network. Does that mean that if we want to deal with these three major issues well, we need to spend a lot of time on others and try our best to maintain the network of relationships around us? Of course not. Adler said that to deal with these three issues well, you should rely on yourself instead of others. Adler wants to help us build a complete self-esteem system from within. The establishment of this system requires concrete actions, and more importantly, psychological construction. Let's start with the action level. Let's start with a common phenomenon. There is a child who doesn't like to study, doesn't listen to lectures in class, doesn't do homework well at home, and knows how to play games every day. What would you do if you were a parent? In most cases, you should do everything you can to get him to learn. Going to remedial classes and hiring tutors, sometimes you can't avoid being told, and if you don't finish your homework, you will be taken care of by the family. But as a result, you can also imagine that this kind of coercive means rarely makes children fall in love with learning from the bottom of their hearts. Of course, there will also be parents who will spend their minds on guiding their children's interest in learning. But from Adler's point of view, none of that matters. The first thing you have to consider is not the purpose of how to let children learn, but whose problem is it whether children learn or not? Learning this matter is the child's own subject. In contrast, parents ordering their children to study is tantamount to interfering in other people's subjects. In this way, conflicts are inevitable. We must distinguish our own subjects from those of others. As we mentioned earlier, Adler said that all troubles come from interpersonal relationships. Here we can go a step further. The troubles caused by interpersonal relationships actually stem from interference in other people's projects, or interference in one's own projects. As long as subject separation can be carried out, interpersonal relationships will change dramatically. Speaking of this, you may still disagree. Letting children learn should be the responsibility and obligation of parents, or at least it should be a common task for parents and children. How could it be arbitrarily interfering in other people's tasks? In fact, it is also very simple. When judging whose subject it is, you only need to consider one thing: who will bear the consequences of this choice in the end? If the child chooses not to study this option, then the consequences of this decision, such as unsatisfactory grades, failure to enter a good school, etc., will ultimately be borne by the child, not the parents. Therefore, learning is the child's own subject. But it should be noted that this does not mean that Adler's psychology is advocating laissez-faire. Laissez-faire is an attitude of not knowing and not wanting to know what a child is doing. Adler's thinking is not laissez-faire. Adler advocates protecting the child on the basis of understanding what he is doing. Parents must be ready to provide adequate support to their children at any time. When the child does not ask you for help, do not point fingers. This is the separation of topics. You need to distinguish the topics that help your children become talents from the topics that children learn about themselves. Separation of subjects is an important part of establishing an internal self-esteem system, and it is also a very specific guide to action. After talking about the behavior level, let me take a look at how to establish this stable internal self-esteem system at the psychological level. We all know that as a social animal, human beings naturally like to be recognized, and no one likes the feeling of being blamed and hated by others. We can do a thought experiment, starting from the human nature of liking to be recognized and hating to be excluded. What do we need to do if we want not to be disliked by anyone? There must be only one most effective answer, and that is to look at other people's faces and show loyalty to everyone you can reach. If there are 10 people around, make a promise to all 10 people, I will try to make you happy. But beware, there is a big conflict waiting for you at this time. Because you don't want to be annoying, you will show your loyalty to these 10 people. But the reality is that no one can please everyone. This kind of promise before will be dismantled soon, and the result of this is to lose credit and make myself feel more painful. All in all, living to meet the expectations of others and entrusting your life to others is irresponsible to the people around you and to yourself. In contrast, Adlerian psychology negates the pursuit of approval from others. It is the pursuit of approval from others that kills your freedom, Adler said. We don't live to meet other people's expectations, and others don't live to meet your expectations. If you blindly seek approval and care about other people's evaluations, you will end up living in other people's lives. Therefore, in Adler's view, true freedom is to have the courage to be hated by others. But that doesn't mean that being disliked by others is a state we should aspire to. Adler wants to tell us that being hated is a kind of evidence of free life, and it is the performance of living according to your own way. If you want to exercise your freedom, you need to pay a price. In interpersonal relationships, the price of freedom is not being accepted by others. In other words, I don't want to be hated by others is my business, but as for whether you hate me, it has nothing to do with me, that is your topic. Finally, let's talk about how Adlerian psychology views sense of worth and happiness. As we mentioned earlier, Adler believes that interpersonal relationships are the source of all troubles. But Adler also said that relationships are also the source of happiness. The happiness brought by interpersonal relationship can be lower happiness or higher happiness. Low-level happiness is obtained by comparison in interpersonal relationships. For example, when you are in school, your test scores are better than others in the class, and you are the first in the test, and you feel very happy. When you are working, your income is higher than that of your peers, and you feel very happy. After having children, your child is better than other people's children, and you will still feel very happy. However, Adler said that this kind of happiness can only be regarded as a low-level happiness. Your happiness must be based on someone else's unhappiness. And high-level happiness comes from the community feeling in interpersonal relationships. This is a key point in Adlerian psychology. The author Ichiro Kishimi said that Adlerian psychology cannot be understood without understanding this. So what is community feeling? In fact, it is a continuous sense of contribution. Families, schools, and work units can all be communities. In the family community, your happiness comes from being needed by your family. In the community of the unit, you can create value for the company and feel happiness. But we also often see that some people lose their spirits as soon as they retire. Because they are no longer needed, which is to suddenly lose that sense of contribution in the community, they feel unhappy. On the contrary, some rich people already have a huge amount of property that they can't spend in their lifetime, but most of them still keep busy working. Why keep working? Is it because of a greater desire? Of course not. What they need is still to maintain a sense of contribution to society as a whole. This kind of happiness is not obtained by comparing with others. This is what Adler refers to as a sense of community, a sense of continuing value and contribution to others. But it should be noted that this sense of contribution still has nothing to do with others, and Adler opposed sacrificing himself for the community. Adler emphasized that this sense of well-being can also be achieved in invisible forms. The starting point and end point of your pursuit of happiness still converge on yourself. Although your contribution and value are reflected in this community, the final result is still irrelevant to others, and you do not need the affirmation or reward of others. Have you noticed that the idea advocated by Adler can be explained in a more vivid word today, that is, closed loop? To be precise, it should be opening up its own closed loop. In other words, your actions and your thoughts should form a closed loop on yourself. For example, if you praise others, you will unconsciously want others to accept your praise. If you apologize to others, you will pay special attention to whether others will forgive you. But Adler's thinking tells us that these are not important. What is important is that you believe in your heart that it is right to do such a thing, and it is meaningful to do such a thing. I once read an article by a teacher called Apologizing at an Elite Level. It is mentioned in it that the elite apologizes and will not pay attention to whether they can win back trust, but who you want to be. The elite's apology is about what lessons you have personally learned from this incident and what progress you have made. They don't control whether the other party forgives, they only control themselves. This may be the elite spirit that our era needs most. This is the end of this episode of the show. What do you think about it differently? Welcome to leave a message to discuss with everyone. Hey, if you like our channel, please subscribe us. Haha, remember to like it.